All right, Steve, we're recording here, and I think we should. This will be the podcast that each of us has to do an impression. So, keeping it clean, what's your impression?
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Welcome to the RentPrep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
Dude, you put me right on the spot. I don't know if I can...
I didn't tell him about this. We decided we want to do a podcast. We talk a lot about real estate, rentals, tenant screening. We wanted to mix it up a little bit today, so we're going to start it off with Steve giving an impression here.
Well, before I even do an impression, because I'm always the one that fails and everyone laughs, not because my impression's funny, but how awful my impression is, you can actually pull the impressions off. So let's hear your best Morgan Freeman. That's one that I know you have tucked in there and you're pretty good at.
All right. My favorite movie ever is Shawshank Redemption. So there's one scene where he's talking about Andy Dufresne and how he's different than everyone else that he's seen there.
All right.
Let me see if I can think of the setup for it.
Yeah, good setup.
All right. Andy had a walk and a talk that wasn't common around here, like a man without a care in the world. He just was strolling through a park. I think it's fair to say that I liked Andy from the start.
All right. Well, listen, that's a perfect segue into really kind of what we want to talk about on this podcast, which is...
I see what you're doing.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm squeaking my way right out of that impression. Maybe by the end of the one, I'll think of one I can do, but man, I'm drawing
You do a damn good Steve White.
Yeah, right. But we wanted to talk about handling stress, managing stress. And I know one of the things that we try to do here at RentPrep, we sort of think of ourselves a lot of time as anti-corporate America, right? Not super stuffy. You'll never see us on a video wearing a suit and tie. I spent years in industries wearing suits and ties, and I love the luxury of being able to come into work and wearing a hoodie or shorts if I want to.
Which is funny because if you look at the podcast thumbnail, I think I'm wearing a suit coat and then you've got a collared shirt on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because they were just the two nicest photos I had of each of us.
Yeah, right.
Because we didn't exactly pay for a photographer to come in here and do a photo shoot for the podcast thumbnail. But I always kind of feel a little bit deceitful with that. I am wearing a suit coat tomorrow. I'm going to a wedding, so I'm wearing a suit. But that'll probably be the first time in about 6 months.
I'll throw a suit on if needed. If I'm going to, I'm smart about it. If I'm going to a meeting with the bank, I'm probably going to wear a suit. If I'm meeting with a client that I feel like it's disrespectful to show up in a hoodie, I'm obviously wearing a suit. So, I definitely have good judgment, but sort of the mentality here is, listen, we want to be comfortable. We work really hard and we let our work speak for itself, and we want to be comfortable, which I think kind of feeds into what we're...
Steve's wearing a leotard right now.
Yeah, what we're talking about today, which is managing stress in your life, not just as a landlord, but just individually. And maybe not that we're any sort of experts on it, but I know for a few years now, we've really tried to look at that, and especially the screeners that we have here. It's a stressful job. And that's something that I'm looking at pretty regularly. We instituted recently a wellness week at RentPrep where each employee gets to pick a wellness activity, whether it be massage therapy. Eric, you went to cryotherapy, which we can talk about, which
was pretty cool.
Yeah. You know what? Can we throw that picture that you took up on the in the show notes?
Yeah. If you search this episode, I think it's going to be, what is this, 162, 163? I always get confused.
It looks like Eric's being hatched out of some laboratory, possibly. We work in a stressful environment at times in an industry, so there's no reason to add to that stress. And I think that's sort of our mentality and our approach is let's try to reduce the stress, make the place comfortable, make at least the work setting comfortable, and hopefully that translates onto the employees too.
Well, I think we should probably relate this a little bit to landlords. But Steve and I just said, let's just get on a podcast and just chit chat about stuff. And we're talking about stress and other things. But I think for landlords, a lot of times the stress, a lot of it that I see is either, when this goes for anybody, is just you getting on that rocking chair a little bit. I've heard that. I don't know if you've heard that quote before. It's like stress is kind of like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but you don't get anywhere. So you kind of start thinking about, and I do this. I was doing this last night. I was in our Facebook group because Facebook is addicting and I like our Facebook group. And somebody asked about warranties. And I was sitting there thinking about it. I was like, oh gosh, I've always thought about at least getting an insurance, the pipe, the water line from my rental to the street, because that's actually technically mine. And if that bursts, which happened to a friend of mine and cost him $6,000, I'm on the hook for that. And probably every like month, 2 months, 3 months or so, I'll randomly think about that water line of my rental. I'll be like, oh, what happens if something happens to that? And I'm like, there's so many of those type of stresses that we have, whether you're a landlord or just, somebody with a 9 to 5 or whatever it may be, where you're thinking about it. And I'm like, yeah, it's the rocking chair stress. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is the 47th time I've thought about that, like that water line. Why don't I try to figure this out? And see what the cost is.
So what did you found that out this morning, right?
Yeah. So, last night I decided, hey, let's see what it is. So I just did a Google search. I said water line replacement insurance, Buffalo, New York, where I'm located. Found the city website. It said, go to this website and you can check it out. It's $4.95 a month. I'm like, so $5 a month. You know what? Hopefully I never have to use it. And at the end of my life, I wasted $1,000. But that might be worth it if I thought about this 700 times.
Right.
So I think with stress, a lot of times it's like trying to there's good stress and bad stress, like everyone knows, but it's like trying to figure out, all right, is this a good stress or is this a bad stress that I'm just kind of like running in a hamster wheel with?
So not to completely jump off topic, I think it's still related, but you made a good point there about, spending $1,000 over a lifetime of that, managing that rental to not have to think about it 700 times, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk for a second about the value of money. I know that I'm somebody that's accused a lot of times of not valuing money the same way that other people do. Not that I'm irresponsible with the money, but I don't know. I do tend to look at things in that way. There's a different value when
you call them fun coupons.
Yeah, they're fun coupons, right? No, no, but I do see I have a different value to money and a different relationship. I've started businesses from scratch. I've scraped the bottom of the barrel. I've scraped to get by. I've chewed my fair share of dirt through hard times. I've had successes. And so I feel like I'm definitely not the type of person that grew up rich and has no value for money. I do have value for money, but I think now that, money is not a huge, worry in my life. Not that I'm, as financially stable as I would like to be, but I'm definitely not scraping to get by. So that I think a lot of times affords me to be less stressed about certain things and to put certain things into perspective.
That's something that I've been trying to focus on too, because I think like in America, we're almost like in this machine that's created to make you worry about money, make you think about money. And part of that machine is all the advertising and everything else that you see every single day. You're exposed to so much, and like America is very consumeristic driven. So it's like you can be in the upper echelon, the upper class in your area, but all of a sudden your neighbor gets a nicer car and it's like, oh geez, what am I doing driving this 5-year-old car? I'm like, I'm filth, I'm poor, and it's just this kind of twisted mindset you get. And I think that's kind of where a lot of stress is actually kind of derived from. And that's why you're making that correlation between money and stress, is because we look at money like you never have enough. Because I think what a psychologist I was reading calls it is the hedonic treadmill. So hedonism is like constantly needing more and wanting more, desiring more. And that it's this treadmill that you get on because, I was doing this for a while actually with electronics, right? Every time Apple would come out, I wanted the new Apple iPhone. And like I got the second generation and the third generation. I was like, oh my gosh, this one's got like, a better camera, or this one's this. And they hold back these features because they know that they're going to convince you that you need that new camera each year. And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, all right, I'm going to buy a year older. And I don't care if my phone's not waterproof, because my next one's going to be waterproof, but it won't be, virtual reality or something like that. There's always something else that they're going to have. And since I've kind of adopted that lifestyle of just being okay with like, second best, it's actually taken a lot of stress out of the equation for me.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I've got a son who's approaching teenage years, and it's a constant battle to get him to change his perspective on money. Right. So I think that there's this social sort of culture around valuing money and the house we live in and the cars
status.
We drive. Sure.
A lot of it's status driven.
Yeah. And as a kid, you're comparing yourself to your friends' families and, your friends' parents and things like that. Man, it's just something that I'm constantly trying to instill in him, that these things don't matter, that, the friends, the dad who has the nicest car or drives a Ferrari or who knows what, does not mean it's equals happiness. Does not mean that that guy doesn't have stress in his life. Does not mean that guy has everything that he wants. And a lot of times what I've learned from some of the most successful people that I know personally is all they do is continue to set that bar higher. It doesn't eliminate any of the stress in their life. It doesn't add to the value of their lives, all these things that they end up surrounding themselves with. It just continues to set the bar higher. Like you said, we're always sort of chasing that goal, that dream of making more and making as much as possible. But where's the balance? At what point do you say, I'm good with where I'm at and where I'm, the road that I'm on, and I've got a great savings plan maybe, or I know that all these things are in order. I'm doing everything that I should be.
Well, it's something too that's kind of frustrating for me working here is that I create a lot of content for RentPrep. And if I look at people that are in our space and it has to do with real estate and rentals, the subject line is always, how I made my first $1 million before I turned 30, or how I bought my first 42 unit rental property, or how I retired and traveled the world by the time I'm 35. And it's funny because I'll read those things, and at first, just because I'm so conditioned to seeing them, and I kind of view it through this lens of come on, there's got to be something more important, more worthwhile than this. But it's also that thing where you read that and then you instantly start comparing yourself to it. And I'm like, geez, I'm 32 and this guy's got 26 units and he's 30. And Brandon Turner is a great example. I actually caught myself, and if you're not familiar, he's the guy who's one of the, I think he's head of business development for Bigger Pockets. I don't know Brandon, but seems like a tremendous guy. And I've seen him talking about his stories, and he's very transparent in some of the stuff he's done. And I'm jealous. I'm wow, we're the same age. He's got one kid. He's 30. I think we're the same exact age. He's got 26 rentals. I've got 2. This guy's got it going on. He's got great video content, which I'm jealous of, all this stuff. And then I'm just picking out randomly one of the shining stars of the industry and comparing myself to them. It's ridiculous. It's I play basketball. I don't watch Michael Jordan back in the day play basketball and be I'm terrible. But that's kind of what I'm doing in that instance. And I don't know why I kind of run into this recurring issue of just comparing myself against other people and not being happy all of a sudden with what I was happy with 2 seconds ago.
Yeah, I think comparing and modeling are two very different things, right? So if you were to say, hey, I really love what Brandon's done. Man, he's just, he's crushing it. He's got this hustle and I've got that in me. And you find it's your time to hustle, and you're looking at Brandon as somebody more of a mentor than somebody you're idolizing or putting up on a pedestal. I think that's a lot different than looking at them with jealousy the way, you're describing. But I think what's interesting about that is, and I've pointed this out to you before, Eric, I think in different points of our lives, we definitely, at least me, go through different periods of motivation, right? So very early on in my business career, I was a hustler, probably like Brandon in the same way where, you couldn't stop me. I was trying everything. I was doing everything. I'm failing and succeeding as fast as I can just to get through it and to get to the top as quick as I can. I've definitely felt that, that burnout point, and I have a totally different approach now because of that. And I still hit points and periods of time where I'm oh, wow, I'm super motivated to do this or whatever. But I don't think it's that same level of hunger that I once had a while ago. No,
that's because you're losing your testosterone.
Yeah, maybe.
There's commercials. I see them all the time. You just take a pill. You can get that back, Steve.
You know what? I would say maybe, but there's been things that do motivate me. I think a lot of it just comes with over time and really looking at your business in terms of, are you in it for the short game or the long game? Long game would be, I've been doing RentPrep for 10 years now, and I realize that there's a burnout factor. There's a point that I can burn myself out, and I've reached that point several times in my life for sure, where you take on too much and you take too many bites and you realize this is more than I can chew. And then there's that point where you just sort of, not going to say get into a comfort zone, but you get into a rhythm more than anything of knowing that, I may not be going at hustler's pace, but I'm productive, getting things done, and I'm in this for the long game. If something takes me a bit longer to do, but I don't have to sacrifice my own mental well-being, then that's worth it for me, for sure. Yeah.
I think one of the attractions to getting into that hustler's game is it's one of those things where there's a direct correlation to your efforts, and you can read everything, right? There's analytics on it. So it's like, all right, that year of my life, I worked my butt off, but this is how much money I made. And then like, that's kind of the attraction, at least for me mentally sometimes, to like towards money, is it's a very distinct reportable thing. Right. So then if it's on the other end of the spectrum where it's like, all right, I want to spend more time with my family or friends or things of that nature, it's very hard to like look back and be like, oh, I did a really good job with that, because there's no metric that you can point to. I guess metric is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, like, from a status level, a lot of people go so hard after money, because it's very easy to see like, oh, okay, that dad's driving a Ferrari. He's pretty successful, because you can't afford one of those. You can't blow $1 million unless you have it, unless, you're making some really poor decisions. But it's just one of those things where I see it a lot in our industry of real estate. And I think it's awesome that these people have this hustle, and especially if it's like a side hustle and they got a full-time job and they're trying to build this wealth for themselves so they can live the life they want to live. But then at what point are you just becoming like a slave to your own work rather than living that life that you originally set out for?
I think the most important thing is, if you have the capacity to hustle and to do that, do it while you can, and do it while the getting's good. But if you're reaching that point of overload and you're reaching that point of crippling yourself from overstress or overworking or whatever, you got to know when to take your foot off the gas a little bit, for sure. And I think that's where the point that I'm at now, and when I talk about my long game, and sort of the long-term strategy with it too. But, one of the points that I'll make is I used to be the type of person that was totally attached to my phone. And this was going back to when they were BlackBerries, right? This is I guess iPhones were out, but this is when BlackBerries were the thing.
Yeah.
And I had a BlackBerry.
I'm a businessman.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I had a BlackBerry, and I was on it constantly, attached to it, to the point where my family was telling me, stop, and I was one of those guys that were totally disconnected. And I hate seeing it now, because I know what it's like when you go to a restaurant and you see a family of 3 sitting there, and the dad's on the phone, or the mom's on,
all of them,
or all of them are on the phone. Yeah.
I remember being in a grocery store, and there's like a nicer store where you get, food and sit down and eat. And I was just watching from a distance a father and his son, and both of them look like they're playing games, just sitting across from each other. And at certain points, the son would try to get the dad's attention to show him what he did on the game. And it was like the dad would almost like lift like one eyebrow to look at him and like acknowledge it. And like, I felt like heartbroken watching it. I was just like, man, that kid just wants his dad's like, just his attention for like a minute, and he can't even get it because they're just both like encapsulated into these devices.
Right. And a lot of times your own kids will be the first to tell you or remind you or say, kids are brutally honest. And I definitely remember certain points in my son's real young childhood where he would say something like, can you not be on your phone right now? And that, looking back, it breaks my heart thinking like he had to tell me that. Mm-hmm. But what that has resulted in now is I have phone time. And anybody that knows me well enough, Eric, you could speak to this.
Worst texter ever.
I'm a terrible texter because I don't ever get back to you within what most people.
I sent you a text yesterday about work this morning, and I knew when I sent it, I was like, I'll probably get something back 3 to 4 hours. And
yeah,
you got back to me.
Yeah, I got back to you.
Yeah.
But it's when it's time for me to get back. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean this any disrespect to you whatsoever, but when I'm out of the office, I'm on my time. Mm-hmm. I'm not on anyone else's time, and so it's up to me to manage that time, and I won't let distractions get in the way of my family time. I have such limited time with them, and I'm here for, the gross majority of my day in the office.
When you say gross, is that like a net/gross thing, or do you just really think it's disgusting?
The majority, and it's not disgusting, but it's the majority. But, you have to make a conscious decision, and it was a really difficult thing to do. It wasn't easy to do, to put my phone away or... and I've actually found now it's easier to not have it on me, because if it buzzes or beeps or I feel it and I know, it's so hard to willfully ignore it versus literally leaving it in my house if I'm outside or leaving it in my car if I go in somewhere. And I know some people think, oh, that's insane. But for me, that's my own mechanism to ensure that I'm not going to be attached to it 24/7.
I think, too, it's so easy to get attached to your phones because it's really easy to rationalize why you have to have it on you. You're like, oh, well, what if something happens?
Sure,
or
emergencies.
But it's like every time you say that, it's like how often, I don't know if I've gotten an emergency phone call in 2 years, to be honest. Like I can't think of the last one, but I definitely use that as like, well, I better bring my phone to this dinner.
Here's a great example. So my son plays lacrosse. It's a newer sport for him. And I go to the lacrosse field. Yesterday is a good example. It's a practice. Some parents are the drop-offs. You know what I mean? They just drop their kids off. We'll see you at the end of practice. I've always been the type that sits and watches the practice. I'm genuinely interested. I only have one kid, so I feel like it's my one shot to do right. I only got one chance at this here.
Am I too old to be adopted?
Yeah. So
make it weird.
So yesterday's a good example. I'm 50 feet from my truck. I'm sitting on a lawn chair. You know what I mean? That chair that I brought for myself to sit and watch the practice. I made a mental note that I was the only parent watching. There was other parents that were there. Every one of them had their face in their phone. And my phone's in my truck. If I absolutely need it, if a meteor comes down and crashes and I feel like I have to call 911, I'm sure I can sprint 50 feet to the truck.
Not if it's a meteor. You'd probably be dead.
Yeah, most likely. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it just eventually seems crazy to you to think that I've got to be tethered to this device to be successful. It's not true. It's just totally false.
Well, they're just designed to be addictive. Just like I find myself getting wrapped into our Facebook group outside of work hours all the time. And I'm just like, well, it's opening. I'm being helpful to people, or, it's helping our brand, or whatever the reason might be. But it's just like I'm sitting on the couch next to my wife, and she's 7 months pregnant, and I'm sitting here answering some lady's question from Arizona about her AC unit and what she should do with, like, if they should leave it on or leave it off with their tenants or something like that. And I'm like, I don't really need to be engaging with that person rather than, like, giving attention to my family.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, let's get deep here for a second. So something that kind of really resonated with me at the time was the passing of Steve Jobs. And for people in our generation, Steve Jobs was like the Einstein of our generation, right?
Sure.
Super well respected, this, visionary, a guy by all means that you would look to and say, this dude did it right. Mm-hmm. This guy did everything that you're supposed to. And I remember Steve Jobs mentioning that he looks in the mirror every day and reflects on his own death, his own mortality. Mm. And I don't necessarily think that I'm at that level yet where I'm looking at the mirror and saying, you're going to die, and coming to terms with that on a daily basis, right? But I do look at my time as very limited. I have one shot. I think when you have kids, you watch them grow, you realize how fast that goes. You only get one chance at it. And so you do sort of put things into perspective of what's really worth my time. Am I ever going to look back and remember the emails that I responded to sitting at my son's practice? Or am I going to look back and remember all the times that I've watched his practice and watched him grow up and enjoyed that as a dad? So to me, it's a decision, and it's not a hard decision when you put it in that perspective. Who's worth more? Is it my son, or is it a nameless, faceless email that I'm responding to that really can wait? I mean, let's be honest, it can wait.
Yeah.
But very rarely is there something that ever comes through that needs immediate attention. And if it needed immediate attention, they're probably not emailing you. Mm-hmm. If it's something that's a genuine emergency, you're probably getting a call.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so for landlords, I think, and part of the reason that we started the RentPrep community and focus a lot on content and how to manage people and properties is really because we get that being a landlord is stressful. Mm-hmm. And
you're on an island too.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily rubbing elbows with your coworkers being like, oh, I can't believe this happened, blah, blah, blah.
Sure. And how many times, for those landlords out there listening, how many times have you sat at the dinner table completely detached from your family meal or your family time that you're spending with your family? How many of you have had that 1,000-yard stare because you're thinking about this tenant that just did something so crazy and unreasonable that you can't believe it? And now it's, whether you realize it or not, it's impacting your time with your family, and you're choosing to let that impact your time with your family.
Yeah.
So, the simple answer may not be, simple to pull off, but it's really an easy solution is to don't think of it and don't let it affect you during those times. Have off and on hours that you literally turn it off.
Well, I think part of that too is during your on hours, instead of just thinking about it and making it that rocking chair type stress, think about how can we look at this problem? What are the steps that you can take to remedy it? I can't tell you how many times we've seen conversations in the Facebook group, the RentPrep for Landlords Facebook group, where people are like, what would you do in this situation? My tenant's blah, 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 and this, da, 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 da. And it goes down this like rabbit hole where it's just like, talk to your tenant, pick up the phone, call them, say, hey, here's what's going on. I know this is probably stressful for you. It's been a little stressful for me. How can we, remove your emotions from the conversation and just try to fix it? And then maybe that makes it worse. Maybe it makes it better. But if it makes it better, you might find that you solved that situation in that moment. But there's just something about, complaining in your own mind and just building up stress and anxiety and like letting that little hamster, that little evil hamster just kind of spin on the wheel in your mind. And then you're at dinner with your family and you're thinking about it. And then the next day you're like, oh, I should take care of that. But then you're at dinner again thinking about it. And then, you know what, I should probably do something about that. But you know what, that tenant, they're not going to, it's not even going to matter anyways because they're this way, they're terrible. And then you're at dinner thinking about it. So I think it's just when you are on, it's like actually taking care of business, taking steps, trying to find a way to fix the problem and trying to identify if it's something you can fix or not.
Yeah. And I think you made a good point there about communication. We hear a lot from tenants, right? Just sort of the nature of our content and our website. So we attract a lot of landlords, but we also attract a ton of tenants, probably almost an equal amount.
Yeah.
In some ways, I would say. And a lot of tenants are dealing with really tough landlord situations. Sometimes, and it's probably split 50-50. Sometimes they're dealing with an unreasonable landlord, and sometimes they're the ones being unreasonable. In every case, our usually, across the board advice is talk to them, have a communicate with them. Because a lot of times they're coming to us saying, he said this and he said that, and I want this, I want that. What should I do? What do you think about this? One of the most common ones that we get, just to give you a real realistic point, would be they want out of their lease early. And so they're researching the legalities of getting out and all this other stuff. And so what we always tell them is ask them, just communicate with them. Maybe if you present a reasonable scenario to your landlord, maybe he gives you maybe he lets you out, maybe he's reasonable in that way, or maybe your request is unreasonable. And maybe you're at least giving your landlord an opportunity to speak about it rather than you internalizing all this and having these pretend conversations and creating your own story in your head of what's going to happen.
I think something like when I was younger that was kind of a realization for me was when I went to college, because I was stayed in the same area. I went to a school called Orchard Park. You might be familiar with the name if you're a football fan. That's where the Bills play, south of Buffalo. So it started out where I was in an elementary school, and occasionally I would see kids from other elementary schools and just be like, "Oh yeah, they were from Wyndham or Eggert or whatever." And it's like almost like this rivalry in your mind of like we're the better elementary school. And we get back to American consumeristic like kind of point of view. And then we got to middle school, and all of a sudden we're on the same teams, and I was like, "Oh, these are my friends." But now we're playing against Hamburg, Frontier, East Aurora, and these other schools, and they're the enemy. And then eventually I went to college, and now I'm playing on like intramural teams with these people from different schools, different states, and all this stuff. And now they're the friend. Now it's the other team that's the enemy. But I kind of like had this realization where I'm like, oh, I'm always kind of like pitting myself against other people and like having this kind of combative like relationship in my own mind of like, we're the good team, they're the bad guys, and we're competing against each other. And I think as a landlord, you do that too. Because even if you came up as a renter, it's like once all of a sudden you're the landlord, you're just like kind of mentally like creating this like, I'm on this island, you're on that island, and we combat each other. And I think it's like if you can realize that at some point it turns into the Olympics and then it's your country versus the other country, you're all on the same side now. But you know what I mean? Like it's like if you can break down that mental wall in your mind as a landlord, if you feel like you got this really combative relationship with a tenant, a simple conversation, an honest conversation where you pull the emotions out of it and you stop looking at it like, they're trying to ruin your place and they're trying to wreck your life. And they might be. It's possible. And you can try to have that conversation. And if you leave that conversation with, okay, this person's pretty unreasonable, we got to now what can I do? Do I give them an eviction? Do we, are they month to month? Do I just not renew this month? But it's like trying to get past that first hurdle of just like having the conversation, talking with a person. And I mean, we're talking about landlords, but geez, it's the same thing like in a marriage, It's just like, I know I did this the other day. This is kind of funny. My friend and I are training for this bike ride. We're going across New York State, and Steve's well aware of it because he's helping me out with it. But
I'm not riding.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
helping you
Steve's financially. He's donating all the funds go to cancer research at Roswell Park. But I strapped my friend's bike onto the back of onto my car, and my bike was closer to the car. Hers was farther out. We're going to go do a training ride. She's doing the ride with me. And her bike got totaled on the way out because I didn't strap it in very well. And at 60 miles an hour, her bike's completely totaled. And I'm riding home, and I'm just like, my wife is going to kill me because I got to pay for her bike. It's the right thing to do. And all I'm thinking about in my mind is how much of a pain this is going to be to talk to my wife about this because, she's going to be upset with me and blah, blah, blah. And I had built up this entire story. And I was even telling my friend Christina, and we're all mutual friends, my wife, Christina, and myself. And I looking back, I feel really bad about it. I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to chew me a new one for this. And my wife has never chewed me a new one for anything. She's like the sweetest person. And when we got there, she's just like, is everyone okay? Like, did anyone else hit the bike? And that was it. That was the whole conversation. But I had spent maybe a half hour, because we ended up going to the bike shop too before I got home. I didn't call her right away to be like, hey, listen to this. I wanted to break the news in person. But I just created this whole story about the way my wife was going to act to this situation. And then there's actually what happened. And all that stress in between those 2 points was all self-generated.
Totally unnecessary.
All a story.
Yeah.
All unnecessary.
Right.
And then just having the conversation is the point at which that went away. But I think for the marriage, for me, that's not something I would ever hide from my wife. So it's like she's going to hear about it right away. But I think with a landlord-tenant relationship, it's pretty easy to like just put things off and put it off and put it off and start building a story about how evil this other person is and not have the conversation.
Absolutely. And the more time you're left with your own thoughts and imagination, the worse things are going to get usually. So don't let it fester to that point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you would have held off 2 days to tell your wife, imagine the mental torture you would have put yourself through. 2 days of just beating yourself up and worrying and what's the reaction going to be and the story you're creating in your mind versus the reality of, hey, as long as everyone's okay, these things happen, it's all fine.
So kind of getting long here in the episode, but we said we wanted to just have an open conversation on one, not really like a particular topic, but we're just talking stress, reducing stress, maybe detaching from the cell phone. What else do we talk about? Communication, having good communication, and just kind of being present in the moment. So if you're a landlord, you're listening in, hopefully you got something from this. We just kind of wanted to mix it up a little bit this week, but have the conversation, have open communication with your tenants. And try not to just, have that stress that's a rocking chair stress, Take care of it.
Yeah. Get out of the grind. Take a step back every once in a while. Appreciate what you have. Appreciate
Get off your BlackBerry.
Yeah. Appreciate, yeah. If you're still on a BlackBerry.
This episode's for you.
Yeah. No, I think for landlords especially, it's a super stressful industry and environment. And so anything that you can do that might even help yourself down the road. Maybe you're not even feeling super stressed out now, but there will be likely a day that it's coming. So, anything that you can put in place now and good habits that you can create that might help manage that down the road will be beneficial for sure.